The diner fell completely silent the moment the old woman stepped inside. No one insulted her. No one asked her to leave. Every customer simply picked up their plates and quietly moved to another table, refusing even to look at the 81-year-old woman. Then, a local man deliberately kicked over the only bowl of water she had just carried outside. Before Gunnery Sergeant Logan Mercer could react, his German Shepherd canine, Atlas, calmly stepped between the man and the old woman. That was the moment Logan realized something wasn't right. How could an entire town hate one lonely woman for nearly 40 years, and not a single person be willing to explain why? If you enjoy stories of loyalty, hope, and second chances, please subscribe and help us reach 1,000 subscribers. Your support helps us continue sharing stories that matter. Late autumn settled quietly over Red Willow, Colorado, while cold wind carried dry leaves across the empty streets beneath a sky of dull gray clouds. Gunnery Sergeant Logan Mercer had expected nothing more than a peaceful stop before returning to his Marine unit. At 40 years old, Logan carried himself with the quiet confidence that only years of service could build. He stood 6'2", with broad shoulders, a square jaw, steel gray eyes, and short, dark brown hair cut in regulation military style. A faint scar stretched along the left side of his neck, a reminder of a mission that had taught him never to judge people by rumors alone. Since that day, he had trusted observation more than opinion, believing that fear and kindness often hid where nobody expected to find them. Walking beside him was Atlas, his 6-year-old German Shepherd canine. Atlas had a thick black and tan coat, intelligent amber eyes, and the calm discipline of a highly trained working dog. He rarely barked without reason and had an unusual ability to sense both danger and human emotion. Logan often joked that Atlas understood people better than most people understood themselves. The town's annual Marine tribute ceremony was still a day away, leaving Logan free to explore the quiet community. Red Willow looked like hundreds of other small American towns. Brick storefronts, a white church, old maple trees lining Main Street. But something about the place felt unusually heavy. Smiles disappeared quickly whenever strangers asked questions, and conversations ended the moment unfamiliar footsteps approached. The small diner on Main Street seemed lively until the front door slowly opened. Every voice stopped. An elderly woman entered, carrying herself with remarkable dignity despite obvious age. Ruth Holloway was 81 years old, short and slender, with neatly pinned silver hair and deeply lined skin shaped by decades of hard work beneath the Colorado sun. She wore a faded navy cardigan over a simple floral dress that had been carefully mended several times. Her blue-gray eyes remained warm despite the loneliness they quietly carried, and she greeted the waitress with a gentle smile that received no answer in return. Logan did not watch Ruth. He watched everyone else. People quietly lifted their coffee cups and moved to different tables. A young mother pulled her little boy closer. 2 older men lowered their voices until they were barely whispering. Nobody insulted Ruth. Nobody ordered her to leave. They simply behaved as though she did not deserve to exist in the same room. The silence unsettled Logan far more than open hostility would have. Atlas noticed it too. The German Shepherd remained seated beside Logan, but his ears pointed toward Ruth while his eyes never left her. After finishing only half a bowl of soup, Ruth thanked the waitress anyway, carried a small metal bowl outside, and filled it with water from the faucet beside the porch. She had barely lowered herself onto the old wooden bench when a heavy work boot kicked the bowl across the porch. Water splashed onto the weathered boards. The bowl rolled into the street. The man responsible, a rough-looking mechanic in his late 50s, with an unshaven face and grease-stained clothes, looked down at Ruth without anger or guilt. "You don't deserve kindness," he muttered before turning away. Atlas reacted instantly. The German Shepherd moved between Ruth and the man, standing perfectly still. He did not growl or bare his teeth. His posture alone warned that no one would take another step toward the elderly woman. Logan followed immediately. "That's enough," he said firmly. The mechanic glanced at Logan's Marine uniform, shrugged dismissively, and walked away without another word. Logan retrieved the bowl, rinsed it, filled it again, and handed it back to Ruth. "I'm sorry you had to experience that," Ruth said softly, almost as if she believed she had inconvenienced him. Logan frowned. "You've done nothing that requires an apology." For the first time, Ruth looked directly into his eyes. There was gratitude there, but something else as well. A sadness so familiar that Logan recognized it immediately. He had seen that same expression on Marines who had returned home carrying burdens they could never explain. Before either of them could speak again, another voice interrupted. "If you're still wearing that Marine uniform," the elderly man said calmly, "don't step inside her house." Logan turned toward the speaker. Harold Quinn stood several feet away with his hands folded behind his back. At 72, Harold remained tall and straight despite his age. His neatly combed silver hair, tailored wool coat, and polished leather shoes reflected a lifetime of discipline and success. As president of the local bank and chairman of several civic organizations, he was widely respected throughout Red Willow. Yet behind his composed expression, Logan caught a brief flicker of hesitation when Harold looked toward Ruth. "Why?" Logan asked. Harold held his gaze for several long seconds. "Some stories stay buried for a reason." Without another explanation, he walked away. The words stayed with Logan for the rest of the afternoon. Later, while visiting the town's small Veterans Museum, Logan wandered through rows of photographs honoring local service members. In the far corner hung a portrait of a young Marine dressed in formal blues. His confident smile suggested a future filled with promise. Beneath the frame, nothing. The nameplate had been deliberately removed. Only 4 empty screw holes remained. "Who was he?" Logan asked the elderly museum caretaker. The old man stiffened before quietly dusting the display case. "We're closing early today." It was not an answer, it was another silence. That night, Atlas suddenly rose from the motel floor and nudged Logan's hand. The dog walked straight to the door and refused to settle until Logan followed him outside. Without hesitation, Atlas led him through several quiet streets before stopping in front of a lonely wooden cottage standing at the very edge of town. A single porch light glowed softly against the darkness. Logan looked toward the small house. Then he looked back at the photograph still lingering in his memory. For reasons he could not yet explain, he became certain that the forgotten Marine named Nathan Keller and the lonely woman called Ruth Holloway shared a story that an entire town had spent nearly 4 decades trying to erase. The following morning arrived beneath a pale sky, and Red Willow looked no different than it had the day before. Yet Logan sensed the town watching him long before he stepped onto Main Street. Word had already spread that the visiting Marine had defended Ruth Holloway. In a community this small, silence traveled faster than conversation, and curiosity often wore the disguise of politeness. Logan spent the next several days doing something he had learned during years of investigations alongside military police after overseas deployments. He never began with evidence. He began with people. Every rumor, no matter how ridiculous, usually contained a tiny fragment of truth hidden beneath layers of fear, pride, or misunderstanding. Carrying a small notebook instead of asking direct accusations, he visited the barber shop, the hardware store, the bakery, the church office, and even the gas station at the edge of town. The answers changed every time, but one detail remained strangely consistent. Everyone believed Ruth Holloway had destroyed Nathan Keller's life. When Logan calmly asked whether they had personally witnessed any of it, the room always became uncomfortable. Some looked toward the floor. Others suddenly remembered unfinished work, No one answered the question. The owner of the bakery, a cheerful woman in her 60s named Helen Morris, admitted she had repeated the story for years without ever questioning where it came from. Helen was short, with curly gray hair tucked beneath a flower-covered cap, rosy cheeks, and gentle green eyes that rarely judged anyone. She sighed heavily before admitting, "My mother told me. Her mother told her. I suppose I never asked whether any of them actually knew." That conversation stayed with Logan far longer than she realized. Rumors survived because every generation assumed the previous one had known the truth. Atlas seemed completely uninterested in those conversations. Every afternoon, as though following an invisible routine, the German shepherd would gently tug Logan's sleeve until they walked toward Ruth's cottage. The moment the old wooden gate came into view, Atlas's ears relaxed, his tail swayed slowly, and he trotted ahead without needing permission. Logan had worked with the dog for years and recognized the difference between curiosity and trust. Atlas trusted Ruth completely. The first few visits were quiet. Ruth offered tea in chipped porcelain cups, apologized for the simple furniture, and spent more time asking about Atlas than about Logan. The Marine noticed something unusual. She never reached to pat Atlas's head the way most strangers did. Instead, she let the dog approach on his own terms. Atlas would settle beside her rocking chair, resting his head near her feet with complete ease. "You understand working dogs," Logan observed one afternoon. A faint smile crossed Ruth's face. "My husband trained military dogs a lifetime ago," she replied softly. "He always said respect comes before affection." It was the first personal detail she had willingly shared. Logan sensed there were many more waiting behind that quiet sentence. Outside, the autumn wind rattled the old maple branches, while Ruth slowly knitted a wool scarf with hands that still moved carefully despite age. Logan noticed framed photographs throughout the small cottage. Most showed landscapes, flowers, or old family gatherings. None displayed military uniforms. None showed Nathan Keller. "You've removed every photograph that could answer my questions," Logan finally said. Ruth's knitting needles stopped moving. "I've removed nothing." "Then where are they?" Her eyes drifted toward the window. Some memories become too heavy to leave hanging on a wall. Before Logan could ask another question, Atlas quietly stood, walked toward the front door, and sat facing outside. Someone was approaching. A slow knock echoed through the cottage. When Logan opened the door, Harold Quinn stood on the porch holding his hat against the cold wind. In daylight, he looked older than before. The lines across his face appeared carved by years of sleepless nights rather than age alone. His posture remained straight, but his tired eyes betrayed a burden he seemed unwilling to share. "I hoped I'd find you here," Harold said. Neither Logan nor Ruth answered immediately. Harold looked at Ruth for several long seconds before lowering his gaze. "I came to speak with the Marine." Logan stepped onto the porch and quietly closed the door behind him. "You've been asking questions all over town," Harold began. "People are talking. I've noticed. This won't end the way you think." Logan folded his arms. "Then tell me how it ends." Harold looked toward the mountains surrounding Red Willow. "When people dig into old pain, they rarely uncover justice. Usually, they uncover more pain." "Is that experience talking?" For the briefest moment, Harold's expression faltered. "It is." He adjusted his coat before continuing. "Leave this town before tomorrow's ceremony. Attend the memorial, shake a few hands, drive away. Let old ghosts stay buried." Logan studied the elderly banker carefully. Nothing in Harold's voice sounded hateful. It sounded frightened. "You're not protecting yourself," Logan said quietly. Harold's eyes met his. "No. You're protecting someone else." Harold did not answer. Instead, he turned and slowly walked down the path toward his waiting truck, shoulders noticeably heavier than when he had arrived. Watching him disappear, Logan realized something that none of the rumors had prepared him for. People who hated Ruth spoke with anger. Harold spoke with regret. That evening, Logan returned to the Veterans Museum, hoping the caretaker might be more willing to talk. Instead, he found another employee carefully cataloging donated photographs. The woman introduced herself as Emily Carter, a history teacher in her early 30s who volunteered several evenings each week. Tall and slender, with chestnut hair tied into a practical ponytail, clear hazel eyes, and an endlessly patient manner, Emily believed every forgotten photograph represented a family that deserved to be remembered. When Logan quietly asked about Nathan Keller, Emily hesitated. "I've only worked here 3 years," she admitted, "but every time someone asks about him, people become nervous." "Do you know why?" She slowly shook her head. "No, I only know someone removed that nameplate long before I arrived." As Logan prepared to leave, Emily lowered her voice. "Mr. Mercer, sometimes people protect stories because they're ashamed." "And sometimes?" "They protect them because they think the truth would hurt even more." Those words echoed in Logan's mind long after he stepped outside. Across the dark parking lot, Atlas suddenly stopped walking. The German shepherd stared toward the distant lights surrounding Ruth's cottage. His ears rose. His body became perfectly still. Logan followed the dog's gaze. Far away, someone stood silently beside Ruth's front gate, watching the house before disappearing into the darkness. The afternoon light inside Ruth Holloway's cottage had turned soft and gold, stretching long shadows across the old wooden floor. Logan sat at the small kitchen table with his notebook open, though for several minutes he had written nothing. The house was quiet in a way that felt different from loneliness. It felt preserved, as if every chair, every curtain, every faded photograph had been waiting for someone brave enough to ask the right question. Ruth moved slowly near the stove, preparing tea with hands that trembled only when silence became too heavy. Atlas lay beside her rocking chair, his black and tan body relaxed, his amber eyes half open, still watchful even in rest. Over the past few days, Logan had learned that Red Willow was not hiding one story. It was hiding many versions of the same wound. Everyone claimed to know what Ruth had done, yet no one had ever seen the truth with their own eyes. That bothered Logan more than open hatred. In the core, a man could survive enemy fire, bad orders, and brutal weather, but he could be destroyed by one false report repeated by enough people. Logan understood that kind of damage. He had seen reputations buried long before bodies were. Ruth reached toward a narrow shelf above the stove for an old tea tin. As she turned, the sleeve of her navy cardigan caught on the table corner. Something small slipped from her pocket, struck the floor with a sharp metallic click, and rolled beneath the rocking chair. Ruth looked down, confused at first. Atlas lifted his head instantly. The German shepherd rose without a command, walked toward the chair, and lowered his nose to the floor. He found the small brass key within seconds, but instead of picking it up, he followed the scent farther, past the chair, toward a darker patch of floor near the wall. Logan watched closely. Atlas stopped at one old plank. He sniffed again, then gently scratched the wood. Ruth went completely still. The change in her face was immediate. The softness disappeared, replaced by a stunned, distant fear that seemed to pull her decades into the past. The teacup in her hand trembled so violently that Logan stood, ready to catch it if she dropped it. "Ruth," he said quietly, "what is it?" She did not answer at once. Her eyes stayed fixed on the floor, where Atlas waited patiently, one paw resting near the loose board. When she finally spoke, her voice was barely more than breath. "I forgot where I put it." Logan glanced down at the plank. "Put what?" Ruth lowered herself carefully into the rocking chair, as if her legs could no longer hold the weight of memory. "The box," she whispered. "I told myself I would never open it again. After a while, maybe I needed to believe I had forgotten." Logan knelt beside Atlas and ran his fingers along the edge of the floorboard. The wood was old and slightly raised. With careful pressure, he loosened it enough to lift one side. Dust stirred into the warm afternoon air. Beneath the plank, hidden between the floor beams, sat a small metal box covered in rust and gray dust. There were no markings on it, no lock, no name. Just a plain box that looked far too small to hold nearly 40 years of pain. Logan set it on the kitchen table. Ruth stared at it as though it were alive. Atlas returned to her side and sat close enough that his shoulder touched her leg. Ruth looked down at him, and for the first time since Logan had met her, tears filled her eyes without her trying to hide them. "Your husband really did train military dogs," Logan said softly. Ruth nodded. "And he always said, a good dog knows when a person is carrying something no one else can see." She placed both hands on the lid. For several seconds, she could not open it. Logan did not rush her. Some doors were harder to open from the inside. At last, Ruth lifted the lid, and the faint smell of old paper rose from the box. Inside were several letters tied with string, a thin journal with cracked brown leather, a folded copy of a statement, and a sun-faded postcard. Logan expected proof, something clear, something strong enough to tear apart the story Red Willow had repeated for decades. Instead, the box contained fragments, personal pieces, the kind of things a grieving woman would save because they were all she had left. Ruth picked up the folded statement first. "This was my first testimony," she said. "The one I gave before everything changed." Logan unfolded it carefully. The paper was brittle and the ink had faded, but the words were still readable. As he scanned the lines, his expression hardened. Ruth had not accused Nathan Keller of betraying anyone. She had done the opposite. She had described him as honest, disciplined, and deeply loyal. She had stated clearly that she never saw him remove documents, never heard him discuss restricted information, and never believed he would betray his unit. Logan read the page twice, then a third time. "This doesn't match what the town says," he said. "No," Ruth answered. "It never did." "What happened to the rest of it?" Ruth's fingers tightened around the edge of the table. "It disappeared from the official record, or someone made sure only the parts they wanted remained." Logan felt a cold anger rise in him, but he kept his voice controlled. "Why didn't you show this to people?" "I tried," Ruth said, and the shame in her voice was not for herself. But a copy of a statement, a few letters, and the word of a woman everyone had already decided to hate. That was not enough. Nathan knew it. He told me that if the truth ever came back, it had to come through the proper record, not through grief. She untied the letters next. Nathan's handwriting was firm and neat, the writing of a young Marine who chose words carefully. Logan read only a few lines before understanding why Ruth had kept them hidden. Nathan had written, not with bitterness, but with restraint. He had asked Ruth not to spend her life fighting people who had already made up their minds. He had asked her to stay alive, to keep her dignity, and to wait for the day when someone with access to the right doors might ask the right questions. Ruth covered her mouth with one trembling hand. "I thought waiting would be temporary," she whispered. "I never thought temporary would become my whole life." Logan had no answer for that. Then Atlas nudged the edge of the box with his nose. The postcard shifted. Logan picked it up. The front showed a desert highway beneath a wide orange sky. The back carried only one sentence, written in a different hand from Nathan's. If one day the truth must be spoken, find Thomas Burke. There was no address, no phone number, no explanation, only a name. Logan stared at the postcard, feeling the investigation change shape in his hands. Ruth had not been hiding proof strong enough to clear Nathan. She had been guarding the first thread of a larger truth, one that someone had carefully cut from the record and buried beneath decades of rumor. Outside, the wind pressed against the cottage walls. Inside, Atlas remained beside Ruth, steady and silent. Logan slipped the postcard into his notebook and looked at the elderly woman whose entire life had been judged by a lie. "I'll find him," he said. Ruth looked at him with fear, hope, and exhaustion all crossing her face at once. "And if he is already gone?" Logan closed the notebook. "Then I'll find what he left behind." Winter arrived quietly before Logan Mercer finally left Red Willow. The mountains surrounding the small Colorado town were dusted with fresh snow, and every mile he drove seemed to increase the weight resting on his shoulders rather than lessen it. The faded postcard remained tucked safely inside his notebook beside Ruth's testimony. During the long drive, he had contacted every military archive, Veterans Association, and retired investigators network he could legally access. Weeks passed before a single reply finally arrived. There was only one living man who had participated directly in Nathan Keller's investigation. His name was Thomas Burke, and he had retired years earlier to a quiet desert community outside Prescott, Arizona. Thomas Burke lived alone in a modest adobe house overlooking dry hills covered with cactus and weathered stone. At 78, he was still remarkably tall, though age had bent his shoulders slightly forward. His close-cropped white hair contrasted with deeply tanned skin, earned from years beneath desert sun, while a neatly trimmed gray beard framed a face carrying more regret than pride. His pale blue eyes remained sharp despite age, the eyes of a man who had spent decades studying reports, questioning witnesses, and recognizing lies long before they reached a courtroom. A severe knee injury suffered during military service had ended his field career early, pushing him toward investigative work instead. He welcomed Logan politely, but the moment he saw Nathan Keller's name written inside the notebook, every trace of warmth disappeared from his expression. "I wondered if this day would ever come," Thomas said quietly. Atlas remained beside Logan without moving. Unlike most visitors, Thomas did not immediately reach toward the German Shepherd. Instead, he nodded respectfully toward the dog. "A working partner," he observed. Logan smiled faintly. "The best one I've ever had." Thomas nodded again. "My generation learned long ago that a good military dog notices what people refuse to see." Inside the small house, shelves overflowed with binders, faded maps, and carefully labeled boxes. Nothing appeared luxurious, but everything reflected discipline. Logan immediately recognized the habits of someone who had spent a lifetime preserving facts. Thomas poured 2 cups of black coffee before taking a long breath. "Nathan Keller never betrayed his unit," he said before Logan asked a single question. The sentence settled over the room like a weight finally placed where it belonged. Thomas explained that the investigation had begun after restricted operational information unexpectedly reached unauthorized hands. Publicly, the inquiry focused on Nathan because he had legitimate access to portions of the material. Privately, however, investigators soon discovered inconsistencies. Nathan's timeline never matched the leaked documents. Financial records showed no suspicious activity. Witness interviews repeatedly described him as disciplined, dependable, and unwilling to compromise his oath. The evidence kept pointing somewhere else, Thomas admitted. He opened an old binder and carefully removed several photocopied memoranda. There was a senior officer, Thomas paused before continuing. He authorized procedures that ignored established security protocols. The mistake wasn't malicious, it was negligence. Logan silently studied the pages. When questions began reaching higher headquarters, Thomas continued, protecting the institution became more important than protecting one Marine. According to Thomas, tremendous pressure quickly surrounded the investigation. Reports were rewritten. Witness summaries were shortened. Entire appendices quietly disappeared before the final file reached official archives. Ruth Holloway's original statement defending Nathan had never been disproven. It was simply removed. Thomas lowered his eyes. I objected. What happened? I was told my career would end if I continued. The old investigator looked toward the window, where desert sunlight stretched across the yard. I wish I could tell you I fought harder. Silence filled the room. Logan had seen brave people regret the battles they lost. Thomas regretted the battle he had stopped fighting. Before Logan departed, Thomas handed him a sealed envelope containing certified copies of surviving investigative notes, signed memoranda, and his own sworn declaration describing the outside pressure placed upon the inquiry. I can't restore Nathan's name, Thomas said, but maybe I can help someone else finish what I failed to finish. The drive back to Colorado felt shorter than the journey south. Logan now carried something far more valuable than suspicion. He carried corroboration. When he returned to Red Willow, the town looked unchanged. Yet Harold Quinn seems to know immediately why the Marine had come back. Before Logan even reached Ruth's cottage, Harold was waiting outside the old bank beneath a leafless cottonwood tree. I've been expecting you, Harold said. His voice sounded older than before. Logan followed him without speaking. Harold led him to a modest farmhouse standing several miles beyond town limits. Dust covered the porch. No vehicle occupied the driveway. The house had belonged to Harold's late father and had remained untouched since his death. Inside, everything had been preserved exactly as it had been decades earlier. Harold slowly removed an old wooden chest from the back of a closet. My father was the senior officer Thomas Burke told you about. The confession hung heavily between them. Logan remained silent. Harold continued before courage abandoned him. My father wasn't an evil man. He made one terrible decision, then spent the rest of his life convincing himself it protected everyone involved. He sat heavily in an aging chair. I believed him when I was young. Then I grew older, and I stopped believing his excuses. But by then the lie had lived so long that I convinced myself exposing it would only reopen old wounds. His hands trembled as he opened the chest. Inside rested a weathered document case tied with faded leather straps. My father left instructions that this box should never be opened. Harold looked directly at Logan. I've obeyed him for nearly 40 years. He untied the straps. I won't obey him anymore. Logan carefully lifted the lid. Inside lay handwritten investigation notes, internal correspondence, and one sealed memorandum bearing official military markings. Near the bottom rested the missing witness summary, signed by Ruth Holloway, exactly as Thomas had described. Every page reinforced the same conclusion. Nathan Keller had been innocent from the beginning. The investigation had never failed because evidence was missing. It had failed because the truth had been deliberately buried. Harold closed his eyes. I spent my entire life protecting my father's reputation. He opened them again, tears visible but uncontrolled. And in doing so, I helped destroy another man's. Logan placed every document carefully back inside the case before looking toward the quiet fields outside the farmhouse. After weeks of searching, every missing piece now rested before him. For the first time since arriving in Red Willow, he knew exactly what had to happen next. A bright spring morning settled gently over Red Willow, replacing the harsh silence that had haunted the town throughout the long winter. Fresh mountain air drifted across the courthouse square, where rows of folding chairs had been arranged beneath American flags that moved softly in the breeze. Nearly every resident had gathered. Some arrived wearing their Sunday clothes. Others came in faded work jackets, still carrying the dust of nearby ranches. They had not assembled to celebrate a holiday or welcome an honored guest. They had come to confront a truth their town had avoided for almost 4 decades. The official review, ordered by military archival authorities, had finally reached its conclusion. Weeks of document verification, sworn statements from retired investigators, and newly recovered records had confirmed what Logan Mercer already knew in his heart. Nathan Keller had never betrayed his oath, never compromised classified information, and had never deserved the suspicion that destroyed both his military career and his reputation. The missing portions of the investigation had been intentionally removed under institutional pressure, allowing one honest Marine to carry the burden of another man's mistake. Logan stood quietly near the front of the gathering, wearing his Marine service uniform. At 40 years old, he had attended many military ceremonies throughout his career, yet none resembled this one. Most ceremonies honored bravery displayed on battlefields. This one honored truth that had survived in silence. Beside him sat Atlas, the 6-year-old German Shepherd canine, whose calm amber eyes followed every movement around the square without a sound. The dog remained composed as always, yet Logan noticed Atlas looking repeatedly toward one empty chair placed near the front. Moments later, Ruth Holloway arrived. She walked more slowly than before, supported only by a simple wooden cane. At 81, the years had curved her shoulders slightly, but they had never broken her dignity. Her silver hair remained neatly pinned behind her head, and she wore the same carefully mended navy cardigan Logan had first seen inside the diner months earlier. She had refused every offer to purchase new clothes for the ceremony. "If this day belongs to Nathan," she had quietly explained, "then I should come exactly as the town has always known me." As Ruth approached, something extraordinary happened. No one looked away. No one quietly changed seats. Instead, people rose from their chairs one by one. The movement began with a young couple standing in the second row. Then an elderly rancher rose beside them. Soon the sound of folding chairs echoed across the square as every person present stood in complete silence. No announcement had instructed them to do so. No master of ceremonies requested it. The gesture spread naturally until the entire town remained standing. Ruth stopped walking. Confusion filled her face before emotion slowly replaced it. For nearly 40 years, she had entered rooms where conversations ended and eyes turned elsewhere. Now hundreds of people faced her openly, not with judgment, but with remorse. The mayor welcomed everyone briefly before stepping aside. "This morning," he said, "we are not correcting history." He looked toward Ruth. "We are correcting ourselves." His words faded into silence. Without waiting to be called, an elderly woman slowly approached Ruth first. Margaret Ellis, a retired school librarian in her late 70s, with soft white curls, kind brown eyes, and a gentle voice that had once comforted generations of children, removed her glasses before speaking. "I taught children to search for facts before believing stories," she whispered. "Yet I failed to do that with you." Tears filled her eyes. "I'm sorry." She embraced Ruth. After Margaret stepped back, another resident approached, then another. A mechanic who admitted kicking away Ruth water bowl months earlier lowered his head in shame before apologizing with trembling hands. The waitress who had silently ignored Ruth inside the diner confessed she had spent years following everyone else because she feared becoming an outsider herself. A rancher admitted he had warned his grandchildren never to speak with Ruth, despite never knowing why. No speeches sounded rehearsed. No apology erased the past. Yet every confession carried the same painful realization. They had inherited judgment without ever questioning its source. Harold Quinn remained standing alone until the line had ended. The respected banker looked older than Logan had ever seen him. Months of sleepless reflection had carved deeper lines across his face. But something different had replaced the burden he once carried. It was honesty. Harold removed his hat. "My father made the decision that buried the truth," he said steadily. "I made the decision to remain silent." He looked directly at Ruth. "I told myself I was protecting my family." His voice faltered. "But all I protected was my own fear." For several long seconds, neither of them moved. Finally, Harold stepped forward and extended his hand. Ruth looked at it. Then, instead of shaking it, she gently embraced him. The square fell completely silent. Many people quietly wiped tears from their faces. Forgiveness, Logan realized, required even more courage than confession. Following the formal presentation restoring Nathan Keller's honor, a representative from the military archival office approached Logan carrying a sealed envelope recovered during the final stages of declassification. The official explained that the letter had remained secured with personal correspondence until the investigation officially concluded. Logan accepted it carefully. Nathan Keller's name appeared across the front in familiar handwriting. He walked toward Ruth without saying a word and placed the envelope into her hands. She hesitated before opening it. Inside rested a single page. The handwriting remained steady despite the years separating writer and reader. "Ruth, if one day they finally learn the truth, don't let them spend their lives apologizing to me. Instead, ask them to show kindness to the next person they are tempted to judge before knowing the whole story. That will be enough. Nathan." Ruth covered her mouth as tears finally escaped after decades of remarkable restraint. She had survived loneliness, suspicion, and countless quiet humiliations without breaking. Those few lines accomplished what 40 years of suffering never had. Atlas quietly walked forward and lay beside her feet. Without hesitation, Ruth rested one trembling hand upon the German shepherd's head. Logan looked across the square. Months earlier, he had watched people abandon tables simply because Ruth entered a diner. Now the ceremony ended, yet nobody hurried home. Instead, residents gathered around Ruth naturally. Someone brought her coffee, another offered homemade pie. Children pulled extra chairs into a circle around her, asking gentle questions about Nathan's life. Laughter slowly replaced decades of uncomfortable silence. Every seat surrounding Ruth became occupied, not because anyone instructed them to sit there, because they wanted to. Logan smiled quietly. Justice had restored Nathan Keller's name, but compassion had restored something even harder to recover. An entire community had finally remembered how to see the woman who had carried the truth alone for nearly 40 years. As Logan and Atlas prepared to leave Red Willow the following morning, he glanced one final time toward the little diner where everything had begun. Through the front window, he saw Ruth seated at her usual table. This time, she was not alone. Every chair beside her was filled. No explanation was necessary. The town's truest apology had never been spoken. It had simply chosen to sit beside her. Sometimes God's greatest miracles don't arrive with thunder or impossible wonders. Sometimes they begin with one person who refuses to walk away when everyone else does. A single act of courage can uncover the truth. A single act of kindness can heal wounds that have lasted for decades. And a single decision to stand beside someone who has been forgotten can change an entire community. In our own lives, we may never know what burdens another person is carrying. Before believing rumors or judging someone by what we've heard, Perhaps God is inviting us to choose compassion instead, because every person has a story, and sometimes the truth is waiting patiently for someone willing to listen. If this story touched your heart, please share it with someone who needs this reminder today. Leave a comment below and let us know what lesson stayed with you the most. Your thoughts may encourage someone else who is quietly struggling. And if you enjoy meaningful stories about courage, loyalty, faith, and second chances, don't forget to subscribe to The Last Patrol and join our growing family. May God bless you and your loved ones with peace, wisdom, good health, and the courage to choose kindness, even when it is difficult. Thank you for watching, and we'll see you in the next story.